Hello and welcome to our paddlefish edition of Ask an Angler. So today we're going to be touching on everything Oklahoma paddlefish. Fortunately for this course, we don't have a whole lot of tackle, so that's going to be nice and easy. We're going to show you how to kind of rig up a rod for paddlefish, kind of what you're looking for your rod and reel. Unlike most species that we fish for in the state, our equipment is really the most important aspect of this. Where if you're not quite using the right equipment, even if you're on fish, it might be a little difficult for you, and you're going to wear out equipment pretty quickly because we're dealing with very large fish, and we're snagging them. So you don't catch paddlefish in the mouth. They're plankton eaters. They eat microscopic. They're filter feeders, just like uh, some types of whales and things like that. So they're really, really big. They're eating calorie rich plankton that is very small. So you don't really have the opportunity to catch them like you would with any other traditional species. So you're snagging. So we're going to go ahead and start touching on all the stuff that you incorporate into your snagging efforts when you go paddle fishing. So like I said, the equipment is pretty basic as far as what you need, but knowing what you need within that equipment is really going to help you out along the way. So uh, really all you need is a surf rod. So because you're snagging, you have two different options. You can troll behind a boat, or you can cast and actually be actively snagging. As far as trolling goes, we'll touch a little bit on that, but this is mainly for bank anglers getting after fish when they're either up in a tailwater or they're in the river system and you're fishing from the bank. When you're on a boat, you have some more options as far as fighting the fish because you're able to track them once you've hooked up. So when you're on the bank, your equipment's really important in having it set up if you want to land the fish. Especially paddlefish, when we catch them in the rivers and in tailwaters, it's generally because there's elevated flow. So not only are you dealing with that, but you're dealing with a fish who is not hooked in the mouth. So you're taking anywhere between 15 pounds to 100 pounds of a fish that's side hooked in current. And that puts a lot of stress on your equipment. So when you're trying to land something like that, it's really important to make sure that you got the right equipment that you're working with. So um, from a rod and reel perspective, you're looking at least a 9-foot rod because when you're casting and swinging to have your hook and weight move through the water, the longer your rod is, the longer the sweep is. So when you cast out and you're sweeping the rod, the longer the rod actually is, the longer of a sweep that you get. And with these fish, you're kind of casting perpendicular with the current because those fish are staged up, and ideally you're trying to hit them right in the side. Preferably, it's a game of chance, but if you can hit them front half up, you have a little bit more control over them. If you tag them back half, then you're dealing with the tail. They can use their head a little bit more, and you're going to get more of a fight out of them. They're going to have a little bit more control. So we have a couple of different rods here. We don't have ocean here, so you don't see a lot of surf rods being sold. So trying to track down kind of a specialty rod, a 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-foot surf rod can be kind of difficult if you're just going to your normal bait and tackle shops, big box outfitters. You're not going to have a whole lot of options. So most of our paddle fishing in the state takes place in the northeastern part of the state, and retailers up there, they have more options for paddlefish equipment just because it's one of the few places on earth that it's a prevalent species that's fished after year after year after year. So they do have some equipment up there. Nabatac in Claremore is a great stopping off point. If you're heading up to the northeast to go paddle fishing, they have every which different type of rod, reel, line, hooks, weights that you would need to go paddle fishing. And then some of the area bait shops and Walmarts in the northeastern part, Miami in particular, they're going to have some paddlefish specific equipment as well. But if you live in a part of the state where you don't really have paddlefish, or you're in Oklahoma City and you go to Bass Pro or Cabela's or Academy, Dick's, you're going to struggle to find some of that equipment, especially the little bit that they usually do have sells out pretty quick. So um, these meat hunter rods, you'll see these a lot. They're typically a kind of dark yellow, light orangish color. They say meat hunter right on the rod. They're made here in Oklahoma. And these are really good rods. You get a lot of value out of these. You know, this is a rod. While they're a little bit expensive, it's a rod that's going to last you your entire life if you take care of it. They have big, thick guides on them that are really, I mean, they're sturdy. You can't move them. They're hard to knock off. If you get like a 10-foot rod or a 12-foot rod, a lot of times they come in two pieces. So this is a 2-piece rod on a 10-footer. So you can take it apart and you can put it right in the back of your vehicle. If you buy one of the 1-piece rods, you're going to have, you know, the bed of your truck to be able to put it in because they're 9-10 feet long. They don't travel very well. So I definitely, if it's me, I like the 2-piece rods. It doesn't really make, you know, much of a difference from a fishing perspective, but they're definitely easier to transport. So if you're looking for just a first snagging rod and you want to get something that you know is going to last you a little while and you can get some value out of it, because these are great for targeting big blue cats, stripers. So you have a kind of a multi-purpose rod that you can get some extra usage out of in Oklahoma if you get it. And then for reels, you know, most of the time using a spinning reel is going to be the easiest way to cast because you're using a pretty heavy weight to throw, but you can use a casting reel. And if you are going to go with something like that, like this is an Abu Garcia ambassador reel. But again, you need to be skilled in being able to cast these or you'll wind them pretty quickly and it's just a lot to deal with. And you don't have a whole lot of time when you're snagging. You have to be pretty good on being able to cast, shut your bail, and immediately be swinging because you're using a lot of weight. There's a lot of current coming through. There's lots of stuff on the bottom. It's very easy to get hung up if you can't actively engage your reels. So spinning reels to start off with, unless you're an experienced casting reel caster, I would stick with the spinning reels to start. Would the rods be good for fishing gar as well? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a little much for gar, especially the 10-footers, but like a 9-foot rod, that's going to be a pretty good multi-purpose striper gar. They're very sturdy rods. You're going to be able to, I mean, we land 100-pound paddlefish on these rods. So, and that's snagged. So that's not just a 100-pound fish. That's 150, 200 pounds of pressure with the snagged fish as opposed to hitting a fish in the mouth that you can control a little bit better. So you get yourself a decent snagging rod. You're going to get a lot of value out of it for other larger species. You know, anything you're targeting that's going to be average above 20 pounds, these rods are going to be able to handle all of that. You've been fishing on the refuge. If you specify what refuge you're fishing out of, I might be able to help you out a little bit better with that. But like I said, so we got our ambassador, our Abu Garcia ambassador reels are a really good kind of basic model. Most of this equipment is going to be relatively expensive in comparison to other things. You're looking, especially if you're bank angling, you really need to have, you know, some of not the highest end gear, but definitely not like the lowest end gear, because while you'll be able to catch some fish on that, you're going to burn out your reels very quickly. So I'll throw a couple of links up into the chat bar here of just some different options of reels that you have, from, you know, some of the more expensive ones all the way down to what is like the most bargain that you can get. But again, those cheaper reels, those $30 reels, $50 reels, the generic catfishing reels that are like Cat Max and King Cat that you see being sold, you know, at a Bass Pro or a Walmart, like with Shakespeare. Those rods, you know, the reels and the line and everything for snagging is fine. The problem is once you get hooked up into those fish and they start to take drag, you're really paying for the insides of your reel, the guts of it, the gear ratio, the drag. And with paddle fishing, it's especially important to be able to have a good drag set on your reel. And if it's a cheap reel, it's going to get drag, but it's also going to kind of skip And what that does is it's just wearing out your bearings and everything else that's in there, and you'll damage your, very generic catfishing rods and reels, which typically come in like a 7 foot to 7'6" package. So the rod itself is a little too small. It's not to say that you can't make do with it. I've seen plenty of people catch fish on just basic Cat Max $50 combo rod, but I've also seen a lot of those reels get blown out after 3 or 4 fish. So it's just kind of what your interest level in fishing and snagging is kind of the equipment that you're going to look, because if you get some of the medium to higher end equipment, it's going to last you forever. You don't need a whole lot of maintenance. Maybe oil your reel once or twice a year, but outside of that, that higher end stuff, having the drag set really good, is you're going to get some mileage out of it. So here's another spinning outfit for a rod. So this one is also a 10-foot 2-piece rod, but we have a spinning reel on it instead of a casting reel. Now, when you're looking for a reel, regardless of if it's a casting reel or if it's a spinning reel, you're looking for something that is at least in the 4,500 class. So when you go and you see a reel and you go to purchase it, it's going to have either on the packaging or somewhere on the reel, it's going to say what the class is. So on this one right here, we have a 6,500. 6,500s, this is my ideal reel for paddlefish. Depending on, different factors like what type of line you're putting on, how heavy, this is going to be able to accommodate all of it. And it's a great reel, but it is a more expensive reel. This reel is going to run you close to $200 for something like this. But it's a very good reel. So, but what you're really looking for is the line capacity, because when we are paddle fishing, we're typically using at least 30-pound monofilament line. You can use braided line, you can use fluorocarbon line, you can use heavier monofilament, but typically your starting point is about 30-pound test. So you want to make sure that you have a big enough spool that you can get at least 200 yards of 30-pound test onto your reel, because while you may only be casting out about 20, 30 yards, if you hook into a decent fish and the water's running and it takes off downstream on you, and now you got to tire it out, if you don't have a couple hundred yards of line on your spool, it's going to spool you out, and then you're going to lose all your fishing line along with the fish. So you want to be able to make sure that you got something that you can at least get a couple hundred yards of 30-pound test on. So 6,500 is a really good model, but 4,500 is kind of the lowest end. Anything 4,000, 3,500, 3,000, those spools are going to be too small to hold the type of line that you need to be able to hold. So no matter what type of reel you're buying, just make sure that you're probably in the 5,500 to 6,500 class. That makes sure that you can put on a lot of different types of line, and you're going to have plenty of spool to be able to put it on with. So with that kind of covers the bases of what the equipment needs are. So I'm going to throw a couple of links in here for those different reel options. We'll go low to high. So here, this first link is going to be a Bass Pro Shops King Cat reel. And let's see. Oh, that one might be a little bit too long to put in there. Let's see if we can get another one. Yeah, these links are just a little bit too long to throw in there. So I'll figure out a way to do that later on in the presentation. But really what you're looking at is anywhere between about a $30 reel all the way up to about a $230 reel. So if you're serious about snagging, something that you want to try and that you want to, continue to do, you're probably going to want to be looking for at least something like one of the lower model pens, like a Pen Fierce reel. That's going to run you closer to $100. These Pen Spin Fishers are going to be the next level up, and they're going to run you between 190 and 250. Brands like Daiwa, you can get a decent reel for like $130, somewhere in there, 120 to 140. And then your very basic cat fishing generic Bass Pro brand spinning reels, those are going to run you somewhere between 30 and $60. But again, those lower end models are not going to have the same drag ratio. And so you can burn them out pretty quickly if you're not fairly skilled with being able to adjust your drag and even be able to adjust your drag while you're playing a fish. So let's talk about a little bit about the line, and we'll look at the hooks and weights that you're looking to use. So here is just a basic spool of Andes line. This is 30-pound monofilament. This is what we put on all of our paddlefish rods. 30 pounds might seem like a low end, but we're using higher end rods and reels. And that is allowing us to use a little bit lighter line because we can play the fish without fear of it snapping because we have good drag set. So the rod is absorbing the weight of the fish, and the reel is, making up for the runs of the fish, and it can keep up with that. So we stick with 30-pound line test. There's also another benefit of sticking with kind of on the lower end of monofilament, 30, 40, maybe even 50-pound test. If you get snagged up on something other than a fish, you can pop your hook. So if you're using braided line, 50, 60, 80, 100-pound braided line, can't snap it. So when you get hung up, you end up having to cut your line. That line is now attached to your hook and weight that are tangled up along something on the bottom of the river. Well, now that line's in the water. So what will happen, and this happens everywhere where you snag, is you'll be casting out there and you'll hook into something and you think you're on a fish for a second, and you end up getting hung up on just line that is out in the water. So braided line is not ideal for casting and snagging, especially in areas where you're bound to have laydowns, which is just about anywhere where you're really targeting paddlefish. Once they're either below a dam or moving up a river system, you're just going to have tons and tons of different obstructions that are in the water. So sticking with the monofilament, especially if you're bank angling, allows you to be able to pop your knot without leaving a bunch of line in the water, which again, if you've casted it out 50 yards, then you're taking 50 yards of line off of your braid. Now, granted, you can spool more braided line in a pound class than you can a monofilament because the line diameter is smaller, but those are things to think about. Putting, hot spot places for paddle fishing in the state, Miami Park, some of our tailwater, so below Grand, below Gibson, below Hudson, below Oologah. Those are going to be areas that have lots and lots of structure that's down on the bottom. And you don't have a whole lot of bank room to work with. So when you do hook up into a fish, and typically when you're bank fishing for paddlefish, there's several other anglers lining the bank. So you don't really have the ability to move yourself physically with the fish. So you want to have equipment where you can hold on to the fish, but you can also get yourself out of trouble should you, snag something up on the bottom. So as far as your hooks and weights go, pretty simple. We're just looking for barbless treble hooks. So the main brand is going to be Spoonbill King. You can buy their hooks online. You can find them at a lot of major retailers, especially here in Oklahoma: Academy, Bass Pro, Cabela's, Walmarts, and local bait shops up in the northeastern part of the state. You're going to see those boxes. Now, you're going to get a box of hooks like a 12 to 20 pack, depending on what you're buying, the size of the hook. And they're fairly expensive. I mean, you're looking at probably somewhere between $13 and $16 a pack for 10 to 20 hooks. And they're going to look something like this. So this is an 8/0 Spoonbill King hook. This is the smallest end of kind of a hook that you would use for snagging. So we're looking at anything from an 8/0 to a 12/0. That's kind of your range. Now, there are people who can get 14/0 hooks and things like that, but you're really not improving your snagging success of hookup by changing the size of the hook, especially when you're snagging, when you're actively swinging a rod. These are going to sit on the line similarly. So when they're going, a little bit extra of that gap. So here's a 12/0 hook versus an 8/0 hook. But we hook up just as many fish on this as we do on this. And this, obviously, if you're not hitting fish, has a lot more opportunity to get hung up on something else. But so this is like a Bass Pro 10/0 hook. And as you can see, it still has the barbs on it. So you can buy snagging hooks. Bass Pro and other retailers will sell snagging hooks, but they have to be barbless. So something like this, you can't easily pinch these with pliers. It's not like a small, this is very thick. Um, so you need like a file. You're gonna have to get like a metal or a wood file and file those down or weld them on, burn them off. Is what. But if you buy the Spoonbill Kings, they come barbless, so they're gonna look like this with no barb on them, nothing shaved down. So these are the way to go, so that you can stay legal and you're not doing a bunch of extra work to try to, shave down a hook. And then for as far as our weights go, you're looking for just a bank casting weight, because if we're snagging, we're trying to cast. So you're looking for weights that look like these. There's just bank casting weights. So we have a 2 ounce here and a 5 ounce here, a 3 ounce and a 4 ounce. So that's the range that we're sticking in, is 2 to 5 ounces. And that's completely predicated on flow. Depth isn't that important, because an 8 ounce or a 2 ounce weight is going to get down just like a 5 ounce weight is if the water's not really running. It's when you're in that current, the faster that current is moving, the heavier weight you need to get that to fall down into the water column at the right level, that when you're swinging, you're not down on the bottom snagging up and you're not up on the surface where those fish aren't. They're going to be right there kind of in the lower middle half of the water column. So you want to be just right there as you're snagging. So with these, the most important thing is, how do you tie it on? How do you get a hook and a weight to line up so that when you're snagging as efficiently as possible? So it requires tying on it's a very easy knot setup to tie. But if you don't do it properly, your hook's hanging off, which is what you don't want. You want this hook and your line coming through to your weight so that it's all one piece, because if the hook's up, you're just going to hit stuff and you're not going to have enough tension to be able to penetrate the skin to get hooked up. So we'll take some line and we'll show how to essentially get your rod and reel to look like this. So here is one that's already rigged up on our line. So we got about a foot below our hook with where our weight is. And you can see on this that the hook stays flush. It doesn't fall. It's not falling one way or the other. It goes straight down the line to our weight. So when we're snagging through the water, it's going just like this. So it's giving you the best opportunity to hit a fish in the side and get hooked up and get a good hook set. Because like I said, it's a game of chance. You don't know where you're hitting them. You hope you get them in the front half. And you hope you maybe get the line to wrap around them once, give you a little bit more control. Because when you're snagging these big fish in current, I mean, they have all the advantage in the world. So it's pretty easy. You take your main line that comes right down off your top eye guide. So we got the end of our line. What you want to do is you want to get yourself a pretty good amount of tag. So you want to go at least maybe not a full wingspan, but definitely a couple of feet. Like you want to be able to pull it out to where you got about 2 to 3 feet of line from where you want your actual hook to be tied on with. So all of these treble hooks, regardless of if they are Spoonbill King that are already barbless or if you buy a barbed one, they're going to have a fat side of the hook, which is right here. So this is fat, kind of sticks out. And then we also have a flat side below our eye guide. So this is the important part to make sure that everything sits nice and flush when you go to tie your hook on. So we've got our little bit of tag here. So I want to get my hook to where I'm right here. So we're going to take the end of our tag line and I'm going to use one of these bigger ones so it's easier to show. We're going to go in through the flat side. So when we go through the eye guide, we want our line going through the side that's already flat. We're going to pull that through until we get enough tag, because we're going to be wrapping our line around our hook. So we're going to eat a little bit of line. So we're not going to get all of this once we're done to get our weight on. So we've gone through the flat side, coming out the fat side. And now what we're going to do is we're going to wrap each hook point. So you're just going to take it, you're going to wrap it up around one. Then you're going to go to the next one and wrap it around it. Then you're going to go to the other one and you're going to wrap it around it. Okay, so now we've wrapped around all 3 of our hook points. So now what we're going to do is we go back to our tag end and we're going to run it back through the eye hole on the fat side. So we're going to go back the way that opposite of where we came in. So we're in through the flat, back out through the fat. So what we do is we go right back through that, pull all of that tag line through, just like that. Okay. So now we're secured around every deal. That one actually might have came off on me. So it's important to make sure that once you've got it through, because you're dealing with a lot of tag, that you make sure that you're still around every hook, because sometimes that line will jump on you. So take that, go back through the fat, and now we're going to begin to wrap the shank of the hook so that we can secure the hook to the line straight down. So this is what you look like at this point. You got your wraps around each hook point. We've come back in through the fat. So now, or I'm sorry, we skipped a step. Here we go. So once we get wrapped around that and you're going to wrap it around your hook shank 8 to 10 times. You want to do this low down. You don't want to do it up high on the hook shank, because right here on the back, on that flat side, you can see that there's kind of this gap that runs down. That's what we're going to use to secure our line. We're going to run right down through that, kind of like a snelled knot. So you're going to wrap this 8 to 10 times. On the bigger hooks, like a 10 or a 12-aught, 10 wraps is really easy. On an 8-aught, you got to really be tight with, once you get that on there, you have to, so we've wrapped around. If you're on an 8-aught, you're probably going to have to kind of slide that down. And ideally, you want all of that to be, look something like that, where it's nice and tightly wrapped around. You don't have a lot of overlap or anything like that. So now we're going to go back through our fat. So we're going to go in through the fat side. Now we have our tag. So we're wrapped, everything. So now the last thing that we have to do, and the reason we went back through the fat to get to the flat side where we've wrapped, is that little reveal that's in there, that little gap. That's where we're going to run our line down and through all of those wraps that we made. And it's going to pop out right through the bottom. Now we're secured. Now our hook points, when it's going through the water, no slippage. It's on there nice and tight. So now you got 3 points as you're dragging it through the water. You got 3 opportunities to hit that fish in the side. So when you go to tie your weight on, you don't want to be too far away from it. About a foot is pretty good. The farther you get away from it, the more opportunity that weight has to wrap around things, even when you hook into a fish. So with this, we're going to go down about a foot. I'm going to tie on a Palomar knot. You don't really want your knot to be that strong on your weight. Just enough that under normal casting and retrieving circumstances, it's not going to break off. But when you do hook into a fish and it dives into something or it gets wrapped on something, the hook's in it, but your weight is swinging around. And a lot of times you'll hit fish up towards their faceplate, and your weight and line will actually wrap around their nose, their rostrum, or it'll wrap around their head. But it can also do that around logs and tree branches. So keeping your distance between the base of your hook and where your weight, you want to keep it somewhere between like 12 and 18 inches. Anything over that's just going to be kind of overkill, and you're going to find more problems with that. So we just tie a basic Palomar knot on just like that, and then clip the tag end. So clip the tag end off, and now we look like this. So now, for some reason, if I was to get snagged on the bottom, sometimes you get snagged and it's not even the hook that's getting snagged. It's your weight getting wedged into something or wrapped around something. With 30-pound test, I can tighten my drag, set my rod point right at it, and pull back, and I'm going to pop the hook. And in most cases, you end up just popping your weight off, so you keep your hook. But if you can't do that, this 30 pounds, you can snap it. So you're going to get, you're just going to leave, at worst case, this much down on the bottom. And in most cases, you're just going to end up losing the weight And when you reel your line back in, it's going to look like this after you've popped what you thought it was your hook. It's going to reel in and it's going to look like this because it popped the weight off. So definitely don't tie your weight on too tight or a fancy knot. You want it to be able to break away should you get into trouble. So that is the basic setup for paddle fishing. There's some people do it a few different ways, but this is going to get you the most success right off the bat. Is rigging your line like that, size 8, size 10 hooks. 12 and 14, in my opinion, is a little bit overkill. Now you can use those bigger hooks if you're out trolling. And there's a couple of different ways that you can troll these days. Traditionally, people just throw a big 2, 3, 4 ounce ball, just like a cannonball of a weight that would sit down on the bottom. Your hook would be up your line a ways, a few feet, and you would just let those rods go off the back and just run the boat and hope that you ran into the back of one of them. You'll see people kind of do a hybrid style of that where they'll sit on the back of the boat and they'll be trolling, but they'll also every now and then they'll basically just be sitting there with the line out and their bail shut. So because you're moving and because you have so much weight, you're just sitting there and occasionally you're just pulling the rod up to get a little bit higher up in the water column. And then by the time you've done that, you don't need to reel up. You just let your rod back down and that line is already there. It's so heavy that it immediately catches back up to your trolling speed. So that's kind of a hybrid way. Now, what's become more popular in the last couple of decades, but really taken off from people who aren't fishing guides, is using dipsy divers, which are just a depth controlled trolling plate that you use the amount of line that's off of your rod or your reel, and then your trolling speed, and then the size of the dipsy diver, and all of that contributes to your depth. So that's what guides will run in the winter, summer, fall when fish are in the main lake. They'll use their electronics, they'll mark fish, they know at what depth they're at, and then they'll set their dipsy divers at that depth, and then they'll troll back through those lines, and that way you don't have to do anything. The dipsy diver is creating tension on the line, so when you hit the back of the fish, it's hooked up, and then the drag goes to indicate that you have a fish on. So that's the least labor intensive. But for most anglers who want to go snagging, your best opportunity to go do that is going to be from the bank, late March through the end of April. Some of our tailwaters, like below Gibson, you might get decent fishing all the way into the summer, depending on how much rain we've had, how many fish pushed up on that initial run. But those dams provide natural barriers for them, and there's typically deeper holes there. So when water recedes, when they stop running water, instead of the fish going back down river, they'll just sit in the deepest holes right below the tailwater. And then once the water runs again, they'll kind of spread back out in that area. But they typically don't go far from those tailwaters a lot of the time. So you'll get places like Fort Gibson where fish will be there throughout the course of the summer. Most places of the state, you're looking at a pretty condensed window. Middle of March, at the earliest, because typically our water temperatures aren't warm enough to really stimulate that spawning run yet to get them up in great numbers in our river systems. But typically by the middle of March, with the right conditions, you can get a good run middle of March. But most of the time it's somewhere right around now. We just got our first good batch of rain earlier this week. So I'm sure that there's been fishing reports, especially from like the Neosho River, where it's like, yeah, we saw more fish caught this week. There was more fish that were pushing up. But it was a pretty short-lived rain. The watershed didn't pick up huge volume. So it was just enough of that initial pulse to push fish up the river. So now you're going to see fish today that are in staging areas within river systems as that flow dropped back down. It wasn't good enough for them to make a far enough run for most of those fish to really go up and spawn. So we're still not in peak paddlefish season as of right now. So answer a couple of questions. What type of 30-pound line? Monofilament, just something. I mean, you can use any brand. Like I said, we use this Andes High Vis Green. This is going to be some of your more expensive monofilament line, but you can get away with just very basic, brand Bass Pro brand or Trilene, 30-pound big game, something like that. That's going to be plenty. Um, let's see how big the snagging treble hooks. So again, 8 to 12 aught. 8 and 10s are more easily found. That's going to be the size that you're going to see if you're going into sporting goods stores, especially in the northeastern part of the state. If you want to get bigger treble hook, size 12s, 14s, you're probably either going to have to order them online, or you're going to end up buying hooks at a retailer where they have the barbs on them, and you're going to have to get rid of the barbs. So typically spoonbill king, 8 aught and 10-aught. That's what you're looking for. Yeah, 65-pound braid, 65, 80-pound braid. That's kind of the standard of people who use braided lines to snag for paddlefish. But again, there's a lot of negatives to braid, as there are to monofilament. You hook up into a 60, 70-pound fish in generating water or in, high CFS flow, and you hook into a 60, 70, 80-pound fish on 30-pound test, you're probably not going to land it. That's just, you can't run with them. It takes a lot of skill and luck to land a fish of that size on your 30-pound line if the water's really ripping through. So advantage to braid in that situation. But again, there is tons and tons of hanging up when you're snagging. It's just going to happen. You're going to find laydowns. You can cast to the same spot 10 times in a row, and it's that 10th cast that you just happen to find the one arm of that log that was sticking up that you skirted by the first 9 times, and then you hit it on the 10th time. So you lose a fairly substantial amount of equipment if you're going to snag for a long period of time. That's just part of the game. So you really got to weigh what's more important to you. Is it more important that once I'm hooked up on the fish that I know it's not going to break off? So I can hold on to my good sturdy rod, and that fish, I'll just set my drag fairly light. So it can't rip off of there. Just as it's pulling, it's just a click, 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 click. And you can really put a hammer in on those fish and wear them out to get them in. That's where braid has the advantage. But you run that braid into anything that's not a fish, and you're dealing with a whole lot of problems, because now you're in a good spot that you're fishing in, and now you've just put 40 feet of your own line out in front of you that now you have to navigate and continue to cast through. So, the 30 to 50-pound mono, that's kind of what you want to sit in. You start getting bigger than that, it's just really hard to cast. You're going to end up with a lot of just kinks and knots and twists that get in your spool. 30-pound, especially some of the higher end line that doesn't have a lot of memory to it, that's really good. That's what you're looking for, because when you're swinging, you're going to have a little bit of slack that you got to pick up. And if you start using heavier, kind of cheap monofilament, the big game type test that really requires you to keep tension with your bait and your weight so that you don't get twists when you're reeling in, that's going to happen with some of the cheaper, heavier monofilament line. It's going to twist on you. You're going to get kinks. So, but there's no right way to do this. There's just some ways that you can be a little bit more effective and certainly cut some of your own headaches out by using the appropriate size weights, the appropriate size hooks, tying them on correctly, and then depending on your skill level, your equipment, your casting and retrieving skills, things like that, you need to tailor your setup to really fit your needs. If you're the type of person that when you're casting out, it takes you a little bit to get your bail snapped and start getting into the motion, braid probably isn't the best bet for you, because you're going to end up hitting the bottom before you've gotten engaged, and now you're hung up right off the bat. But that's kind of it for the equipment. So ask questions in here. We'll start talking about like where to go. Because like I said, the setup for this is very simplistic. Just rod, reel, treble hook, and weight. That's it. That's all it takes. You don't need anything else. And how and what you're using. Now, a 2-ounce weight versus a 4-ounce weight, when we start getting this heavy, it doesn't really seem like there's much of a difference. It's not like a 1/8 ounce weight compared to a half-ounce weight, you can really tell the difference. When we start getting this heavy, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of difference. That's going to come with trial and error, depending on where you're fishing. You know, maybe kind of what the height is of the stream bed where you're at, or you're fishing with people or around people who can tell you that information. But the big thing you really want to get is when you're casting out. So you're going to want to be casting about 45 degrees upstream, just so you have enough time to catch, because you're wanting to swing it right back towards you. If it starts getting down stream of you, no matter what your weight is, it's going to rise up in the water column. And when you're swinging your rod, you're way high up on the water column and you're just filtering water and wearing yourself out. So really, when you're snagging from the bank, you want to have like 3 or 4 swings. So you want to just be pitching it out there, snapping the bail, 1 swing, pick up that slack, 2 swings, pick up the slack, 3 swings, pick up the slack, and then just reel it in, just crank it in. If you let that get too close to you and you go to swing, you are going to launch a 4-ounce weight and an 8/0 treble hook at you and everybody standing around you. So you really, again, with the trial and the error of knowing how much weight to use, it's same thing. When you're swinging the rod, you're going to have to figure out what is kind of the maximum amount of line away from me that I can make that last swing before it's too close, that when I do swing it, it's launching it out of the water, because that's going to happen with as much weight and the tension you're getting from the current. So that's something to pay attention to, because there are some dangers that come with paddlefish, especially when you're fishing in good productive areas. You're going to have a bank line with sometimes up to 60, 70, 80 people almost shoulder to shoulder, basically rod lengths apart. Weight snap off. If you're fishing like in Miami Park, you're fishing on both sides of a river channel that's only about 80 yards across, 70 yards across, 60 yards across, depending on, flow. So you're not very far away. So you go and you launch your weight out. You have braided line, it's frayed off, your knots popped, whatever. You hear line pop all the time, and you're doing this as you got a 4-ounce missile going through the air. So sometimes that just happens. It's accidental, line breaks off. But you can avoid your own misfortunes of doing that by not swinging too close to your boat or swinging too close to the bank, because you're going to do the same thing. You're going to launch it up out of the water. If you have very minimal flow, like below a tailwater, for example, you probably want to start off with like a 2 or a 3-ounce weight, cast it out there, immediately snap your bail and start swinging. If with that, you're skipping across the top of the water, you're going to want to size up, but you don't want to be banging the bottom either. So it's kind of just, you're fine tuning. You want to be middle of the water column to the bottom third, but not on the bottom, and you don't want to be too high up. So the first couple of casts, start out with the 2 or a 3-ounce weight if there's not much generation, and see if when you cast out, it's like, okay, I got 3 swings in, my line never was up on the top of the water. It felt like it was dropping down. Then that's a good weight to maintain. But the second that you can see after that first swing that your line is working really, really fast and it's clearly staying high up in the water column, then go up to your next weight. Go from a 2 to a 3, and then a 3 to a 4, and then a 4 to a 5. But there's almost no instance where you're fishing from the bank in Oklahoma where you need more than 5 ounces. And in most cases, 5 ounces is too much. 4 ounces is typically about as high as we'll go. And that's even in really, really strong flow. So typically we're in a 3 or a 4. 3 if the water's not moving too much. 4 if it's got some decent flow. But there are, fishing is all relative. There's always little micro things that are going on where a 2-ounce weight or a 5-ounce weight might be more advantageous. But, if you come away with anything from this as far as tackle goes, 3 and 4-ounce weights are your best friend, and 8 and 10 hooks are your best friend. That's kind of what you're looking for. And then everything else is just try to get above 30 pounds with your line. Try to get a reel that's in at least a 4,500 to 5,500 class, but preferably 5,500 to 6,500 class, so you can put enough line on your spool. And then your rod, at least a 9-foot rod, preferably a 10, 11, a 12-foot rod. 14-foot rods, those get a little hard to handle. That's going to come with time. And if it's something that you really take to and you really want to just, improve your snagging, you might look to keep sizing up your rod because you're getting more of a swing out of it. You're adding several feet just from 1 foot of rod to your overall swing each time that you're casting out and doing that. As far as where you're putting your rod and reel when you are casting, so you're casting out there and you've closed your bail and you're going to reel, it just depends on what hand you are, which side you're reeling on, because you can do it either way. Typically, if you're reeling with your right hand, you want to keep that rod butt up against the side of you. And so it's on this way. So when you're swinging kind of across your body. That allows you to keep the butt of the rod still. So when you're pulling this and you've cast it out, you're kind of twisting your hips more than you're using your upper body. Now, you snag enough. I mean, especially if you're hitting fish, but even if you're not, if you're just out there filtering water, it's a very labor intensive sport. So your body's going to feel it. You're going to start to rub the side of your body. You can get real creative, maybe get yourself a little piece of a Tempur-Pedic pillow and get a fishing belt and strap it to that. So you can just put that up and then you can go all day long, maybe put some gloves on because your hands are going to start to get a little raw from swinging. But typically what I'll do is, I'll start off on my good side and I'll swing like that for a while. And once I can tell that I'm starting to rub myself a little bit raw, I'll switch over to the other side and then I'll swing that way. What you don't really want to be doing is swinging on the same, so turning your body and your rod on the side where the butt of the rod would then be exposed behind you, because you're not going to get that same tension. So when you do hit the fish, your rod butt might kick out from you, and we're not using treble hooks. So you want to make sure when you hit, or we're not using barbed treble hooks. So when you hit that fish, you want to make sure that you have good tension from the base of your rod all the way to that fish. And if you have the rod where you're swinging this way and you hit one, well, there's nothing blocking the back of the rod from shooting out that way. And if a fish rolls or it turns the wrong direction, it's just going to throw that hook on you. So being able to swing where the rod butt is on the opposite side of what direction you're swinging, then when you get hit and the rod's going back that way, you can feel, the rod butt can't go anywhere. So you get a really good hookup. And then when you're reeling in, you want to just bury that thing right on your belt buckle. Some people will actually use like deep sea fishing with the belt, where once you're hooked up onto the fish, you can just set it into the case that goes like that. It's not a bad option. It's just when you're swinging from the riverbank, there's just a lot of activity and things going on. So the less things that you could potentially have on your person to get hung up on something where you're moving around. But if you're in a boat, that's great to have that, but it is an option. The weight that we troll with. So we don't troll. All the paddle fishing that we do is strictly snagging, either straight from the boat. So swinging, snagging, casting, and snagging, as opposed to trolling and snagging. We don't do any of that. So we'll either anchor our boat on a good riffle run, a good pool, a good bank where we know that fish stack up on. We'll either tie off to the bank or drop anchor and we'll cast from the boat, or we'll be fishing directly from the bank. Trolling is you're going to get into fish. The problem with trolling is that fish are oriented upstream. Well, you have to either drive your boat upstream or downstream. Well, paddlefish, between the nose of their rostrum and their tail, can be up to 7 feet. So that's a huge target when they're parallel. So when you're casting across the current, you have a 7-foot target to get your hook to come across if you're at the right depth. If you're trolling, you're going, your target goes from being 4 to 7 feet to being like that big at most. So you've now eliminated 6 feet of a fish where you could snag them. So trolling is not nearly as effective unless you're out in the main lake running like dipsy divers, where you've made marks and you're kind of doing S turns with your boat. So you're not trolling in a straight line. you're making that line kind of move across and move across so that you can hopefully catch more of the body, because you're just limiting your odds. So if you're in the river and you're trolling upstream, you're going to hit the fish in the back. So you're going to grab them by the tail, which is not an ideal place to get them, because that gives them all the control. All their power is derived from that rostrum. So they're using that. And if they have all of that to work with and you hit a big fish trolling, even being in the boat, that fish has a serious advantage on you, especially with a barbless hook. So if you do happen to be trolling, you're going to want to use a heavier weight, like 5 ounce, probably 4 and 5 ounces to start at least. And you might go up, much higher than that, up to 8 ounce or 8 ounce, 9 ounce, 10 ounce, depending on water depth. If you're not using a dipsy diver, which is just putting you at a exact depth, give or take a foot or two, based completely on the size of the dipsy diver and your trolling speed and how much line you have off. So that's more of an exact science. If you're just using lead to get yourself down to the bottom, you're casting out straight behind you, leave your bail open and allow the boat to maybe get 40, 50 yards to make sure you got about 100 yards of line out. And then from there, it's really, you just got to tinker with how much junk is on the bottom. Do I really want my weight banging on the bottom? Do I want to be moving just fast enough so maybe I'm a couple of feet off the bottom, and every now and then my weight hits the top of a tree, or it hits the riffles coming up a run or going around a turn, something like that. But as far as a standard go-to trolling weight, it's fine-tuned. That's why what we do when we're fishing is very basic. Anybody can do it. It's very controlled. Like I said, we stick to 3 and 4 ounce weights. We stick to 8 and 10 hooks. We have a foot of line below our hook. We're using anywhere from 9 to 12 foot rods with 30-pound test on them. So we have the easiest setup there. It's already been finely tuned for those scenarios. But when you start trolling, a lot more variables come into play. So there really isn't a standard size. But if you're out in the main lake or you're in a river that's moving pretty good, 4 ounces, it probably is the minimum start that you want to go for trolling. And there's a lot of ways that you can kind of manipulate the trolling aspect of having the weight. You can allow your line to fall all the way down to the bottom with a lighter weight. And then once you've engaged your bail, maybe the boat's moving fast enough that it's not dragging right along the bottom. So it actually brings it up into the water column just a little bit. That puts you in a better spot. But to each their own. And with anything in trolling, it's going to be a lot of fine tuning, trial and error as you go. Whereas if you're fishing from the bank or the boat and casting, you're going to be able to figure out what size weight you need within the first couple of casts. And then you're good for the rest of the day, because this is what I'm doing. But when you're trolling, you go a half a mile up the river and it could be completely different than what you're fishing before. And you need to retie everything back on to have it be effective of where you're at. Would it be worth trying the Red River? So we have a very limited paddlefish population in Texoma. There are some fish that we have found in there over the last few years doing research, but as far as what your success is going to be, it's going to be very limited. So anything's worth trying. I mean, I'm an angler. I'll give anything a shot. But for maximizing your efforts, especially if you got to travel or you don't have a lot of time, maximizing those efforts. So areas like the low water dam above Shoto Bend, basically below Hudson Dam, about a mile or so downstream is a low water, bunch of rocks and everything that go across that is impassable to fish when they're not generating water. So lots of paddlefish stop off, and there's lots of little gravel holes and things right there at the low water. That is a primo spot from now all the way through May. You're going to be able to find fish in there, sometimes in great numbers. Sometimes you get those days where you're hitting 20, 30, maybe even 40 fish in a day. Like, that's a great day of paddle fishing. If you can hit 10 fish in a day, that's a good day. You're hitting 20 plus fish, that's a great day. And but that's the type of place where you could hit 30, 40 fish in a day under the right circumstances. And those days are coming. things to look for, obviously rainfall, and then looking at the discharge. So all of our major river systems that come through are going to have USGS gauges. So you can pretty much just Google search Neosho River CFS near Shoto, and it's going to give you that reading, and it's going to tell you where they're at. And you're looking for somewhere, maybe where they're running about 12,000. So that's going to be moderate generation that's coming down the river. Typically, you're flowing at maybe 4,000 through there, which is plenty of water. That's why those fish stack up in that low water area. They do push up when the water temperatures are right. But if you get one of those days where, okay, we're generating some water, we had some, some decent rains, and you start getting in that 8,000, 12,000, 14,000 CFS, that's a prime time to go. Anytime we start hitting 8,000, 10,000 CFS in any of our river systems across the state, today moving forward, that's the time to get out there to be targeting fish where you might get into them in pretty heavy numbers. Some other areas below Disney, below Grand Lake, is a pretty heavily sought out place, but below Hudson, below Gibson, and below Grand are kind of primo tailwater spots. And then the Neosho River, so Miami Park. Miami Park, you really need the variables. You can't just go to Miami Park and pick off fish when the water's not running. They're just not going to be there because they're going to retreat back. Now, they'll be in the river, and that's why where our Paddlefish Research Center is, there's boats going up and down that river every single day, no flow or flooding flow. And they're going to find fish that are staged up in holes along that section. So for boat anglers who are looking to go out and maybe try as much snagging as they can get in a day or in a weekend, that's your place to go. You want to go to Twin Bridges State Park, and you can go downstream a little bit to the north end of the lake. There's a boathouse, a couple of big bluff walls. Those are really good staging areas for paddlefish. And you don't have to go very far down. You basically run by the boathouse, you kind of go down, and it hits another wall and turns. And everything after that, when you start getting down into like a Gucci Flats, it's a lot more difficult to pick off fish if you don't have really good electronics to find them. So you don't really have to go very far downstream from Twin Bridges to find fish, but you can also go upstream, and every little wall along that is going to have holes that hold fish. So that's, if you're just getting started off, maybe you've been before and you're trying to, get a little bit more into it, that really is your place to go. But what you're really looking for like a primo day, especially if you're limited to bank fishing only, is just type in, you Google search Neosho River near Commerce, Commerce is just north of Miami. So it's just upstream of Miami Park. And that's going to give you a really good, accurate CFS reading. And what you're looking for is 8,000 CFS. If we're on the rise and we've hit somewhere 6, 7, especially you start to get to 8,000, that's when you got to be in the park. And depending on how much rainfall we had, that can last 24 hours. It can last 72 hours. We've had years where it lasts up to a week. But the second that water crests and it starts to fall, those fish have either spawned at that point, or they're going to start dropping back down into deeper holes and wait for the next batch of rain to spawn. And because of that, their spawning rate, what their success in spawning, is very sporadic. Because if you had fish that had pushed up the river but weren't quite ready to drop their eggs, the river had crested, it's starting to drop, those fish suck back down into some deeper holes and try to wait for the next push of water, and that next push of water never comes, they go back. They don't spawn. That happens with alligator gar, it happens with paddlefish. They're not like white bass. White bass, they want to push up with a run, but if it's not raining and they get sucked down into a hole, they'll spawn and go back to the lake. If it starts to, you get too many days in between, water temperatures start to get too warm, they'll spawn wherever they can find good habitat, wherever they're stuck at, and they'll go back to the lake. Paddlefish just won't spawn if they don't have the river conditions. So, but that's something to look for. CFS is very important, especially if you're fishing waters that are not immediately below a tailwater. Up in the Northeast, again, Oologah, below that tailwater with a little bit of generation, 4,000 to 8,000 is a pretty good number. You start getting over that, that the chute that basically comes out of Ulaga is pretty narrow, so that water rips through there when the CFS gets a little too high. So that one, you're just looking for a little bit of a pulse. There's not a whole bunch of gates. It's not a 10 gate type deal. They're just running a little bit of water out of it. So that one, you just need like one gate open just to get the water moving, and they stack up and they're real thick. So that's kind of a more off the beaten path, locals only type of fishing place. Most people, they're going to go to Grand Lake to go paddle fishing. You start to move farther back to the west, below Keystone Dam, you're going to have some paddlefish that are in that. But really, if you're going to fish the Arkansas River, you're looking to go up below Caw Dam. That's going to be your primo spot. So if you live in Oklahoma City, or you live west of I-35, or you live in the Tulsa area and you don't want to drive all the way over to Grand Lake, the Caw Dam from, North Oklahoma City is only about an hour and a half, as opposed to driving 3 hours up to Miami. So and that is a pretty consistent fishery. Those fish push up in there right now. They're going to hang out in there for the next couple of months. The more flow you got going, the more generation you got coming out, more fish will have pushed up from Keystone. They'll go up the Arkansas all the way up there. Some of those fish that hang out in the deeper holes along the Arkansas, and then they just keep pushing up. But they're there now, and you're going to have, again, really, really good days, and then days where you got to make a lot of casts to tag that one fish. But that's kind of the other primo spot for paddle fishing. There are other places where there's paddlefish. Below Eufaula in the Canadian River has paddlefish in it. Below Weber's Falls, there's going to be paddlefish. Pretty much anything that's in the Arkansas watershed is going to have paddlefish. But where they're at in greatest concentrations and numbers is really 3, 4, 5 spots in the state, especially for bank anglers. That's going to be below Grand, below Hudson, below Gibson, Twin Bridges, Miami Park, and then mostly just locals go to Connors Bridge, which is kind of that in-between point of Miami Park and Twin Bridges. But that's a public bank access spot. That's not the right one to go to if you're just getting into it. It's kind of a steep embankment. It's really muddy. It can become dangerous if there's a lot of flowing water. But it is another bank opportunity. And then Caw Dam, lots of space to spread out to snag. Those are kind of your top 4 spots. And then below Keystone, below Ulaga, and then there's, a few more places that you might look at, like below a Eufaula, below a Weber's Falls. And in some days there's going to be fish in good numbers, but our most consistent fisheries are really limited to about 4 or 5 spots in the state. So those are kind of the areas that you should be keying in to look for. But we're there now. We're right in kind of the beginning of the heart of, if we can get some good rainfall, which I imagine we will here in the next couple of weeks, we'll get the right amount of rain in the right part of the watersheds that have these fish. And then it is a week window where the fishing is just lights out, where you're making 100 casts a day and you're hitting 20 fish. You're getting a 20-30% hit rate from the casts that you're making. And that's, if you haven't caught a paddlefish before, after you catch about 2 or 3 of them, you're like, I'm good. Like that was fun. Like, you're going to be pretty exhausted. You start hitting 20, 30, 40 fish in a day and trying to fight them. I mean, you're going to sleep well for a week. So, with that, this is kind of a shorter course. We don't have a lot of things to show. So ask some questions if you got them. I'll try to think if there's anything else that you really need to know for paddle fishing. Regulations are important for paddlefish. They're, a pretty protected species. So barbless hooks are an absolute have to. That's why I don't recommend buying barbed hooks unless you are extremely skilled and have done it before to remove barbs from hooks that are this size, because it really does take filing them or cutting them, or welding, things like that. You can't just if you go and you take pliers and you work that over, that's not going to be good enough for a game warden. You're going to get a ticket because you hadn't bent it over well enough. It's not like a trout hook where you can just smash it down and it's nice and smooth, no barb. It's pretty hard to do that if it's even possible with pliers. So, That's a big thing. Make sure you're not keeping fish on catch and release only days. We've changed our catch and release days around to better benefit anglers who don't have the opportunity to be able to go during the middle of the week. So now um, you can keep fish on different days, but those are the two main things to pay attention to. Don't keep fish. You can't cull them, so be mindful of that. If you're going to keep the fish, they're not bad eating. You'll hear a lot of mixed reviews. A lot of it is people just don't take the time to process them correctly. Our Paddlefish Research Center, if you're up in that area and you catch a fish, they'll professionally fillet it and seal it for you. So most of the work is done. But even in that case, when you get that nice, big, huge fillet back in a nice vacuum sealed bag, when you go to cook it, paddlefish are great for like a big fish fry. You catch your fish, stick to, if you really want to try eating it for the first time, maybe try to catch yourself a smaller male, like a fish that's under 40 pounds, like somewhere in the 20 to 35-pound range. It's going to be a little bit better tasting to start with. But when you get that fish home and you're ready to cook it, I'll cook them in bulk. I'll do it for a fish fry. Have a bunch of people over. But I'll take those big fillets that they give you that still have a little bit of red meat on them. And you definitely want to get all that off. But I will cube them up. I'll cut them in. You basically get like a chicken nugget size chunk. And I'll just cut them up into perfectly diced cubes, run them under cold water, make sure I've rinsed all the film off of them. And then I'll put them either in a bowl or Ziploc bags with milk and let them soak in milk for 24 hours. And then just take them off, wash the milk off of them, pat them dry, bread them and fry them however you bread and fry fish. I like using just very basic Louisiana fish fry seasoning that you get. I don't put any like egg or flour. I'll just take the straight Louisiana Cajun fish seasoning, throw it into either a shaker or into a bag, and then I'll just throw the fish into that, get them nice and coated, toss them into the fryer. For an extra touch, maybe use like peanut oil, like a better tasting oil. But I've never had anybody that I know complain about eating it when I've done it that way. And I'm fairly sensitive to gaminess. I like to try to get as much gaminess out of my wild harvest that I can. So I have a pretty high sensitivity to things that are too gamey, and I haven't had an issue with them when I treat them like that. But I can definitely see them. You can smell them. Like you get those fillets, you just want to rinse them off pretty good. And if you do all that work and you've got it professionally filleted at our Paddlefish Research Center, you can chunk them up into bigger kind of steak pieces, throw them up on the grill. But again, I would still wash them nice and clean, let them soak in some milk or some salt water overnight, draw all of that blood and gaminess out of them, and then just cook them to your liking and see if that works, because they have a really nice texture when you cook them. You can get it's a little flaky, but not much, so it stays kind of like a truer, like a steak, more like a tuna. Where when it cooks, so you can get a really good like steak out of them and smoke them or cook them on the grill or pan sear them. But if you're just looking for the first time to eat them and make them taste good, cut them up in chunks, wash them off real good, soak them in some milk, bread them, and fry them, and get a nice little chicken nugget out. And they usually taste pretty good. Best place to find fishing education events. I can throw that link in there right now. Our Go Outdoors calendar. So where you signed up for this course through our Go Outdoors calendar, that's where all of our fishing and hunting and wildlife diversity educational events are going to be housed. So this is an always updating list. So whatever's on there right now isn't necessarily the only thing that we have going. It's just what we have set in stone. So this is the link to go to check out any free event that we have going on. Every now and then there will be an event posted on there that we're publishing for a partner group that may be a private guide service or in a non-government organization that's running something. And every now and then there might be an event on there that it is a pay class, but it'll say that. Anything that we have on there for fishing is always going to be a free event. So that's where you got to look for that. Where can we go for beginners? Like, hey, hands-on for kids and adults who have no idea what we're doing. For paddlefish, as far as hands-on, I mean, find a family member, friend, coworker, friend of a friend who has been paddle fishing before to go. We try to lay out these Ask an Angler courses to go through. If you're just starting fresh, never done it before, these are kind of the things that you need to do. But I understand that fishing is a hands-on activity, and there's only so much that you can learn from reading and watching videos and things like that. I mean, it takes the physical practice of doing it, and um, paddle fishing is one of those deals that if the fishing is great, if the fish are stacked into these tight areas like a Miami Park, like a low water at Shodo, like an Ulaga Dam or a Caw Dam, where they're just in there in such volume, um, that's really the best time to get new people, kids out to try it. But snagging for anything, but especially paddlefish, is a very labor intensive sport. Kids can do it, but again, there's a lot of physical requirements to this as well. It's hard to hold on to a 40, 50, 60, 70 pound fish if you have it hooked into the mouth. You hook it in the side and you're in 10,000 CFS. You're basically hooked into a Volkswagen in moving water. And a lot of times there's nothing you can do to stop them. So it's just snagging for paddlefish is kind of more of the experience. It's the one thing in Oklahoma that you really kind of get that crazy fishing atmosphere that you get on like Montauk in New York for sea running stripers, or that you get in some trout streams, especially like the ones in Arkansas and Missouri where you pay to go in and they sound the air horn off and there's 300 people lining the bank. That's kind of what paddle fishing is in Oklahoma. A lot of it is more for the experience itself than it is of the actual fishing. But if you're in an area that you can go to, like if you're taking kids, Caw Dam's a good one to go to. You got a lot of space to kind of spread out there. The low water at Shodo can be that way as well. There's kind of a gravel bar that runs along it. You can get spread out a little bit. You start getting, right in the heart of like tight tail waters, like an Ulaga. Not a lot of casting space. You're walking down riprap. It's very dangerous under the best of conditions. It's especially dangerous when water's running and you're trying to hook into fish with treble hooks and large amounts of weight. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. Definitely have kids wearing life jackets even when they're on the bank. If you're paddle fishing, just anything can happen. Erosion, you can fall in the water, and you don't want to mess around with these bodies of water when water's flowing. They're dangerous when water's not flowing. They are deadly when the water is flowing. So not something to scare you, but definitely that's got to be the front of mind anytime. I mean, I've grown up fishing rivers. That is my comfort zone. I love rivers and creeks, but they can hurt you. Moving water, you don't get a lot. It's not like falling out of a boat in a lake where you got your life jacket on, and it might be an inconvenience. You fall into moving water, you can get in trouble real quick. So, but we'll look in the future. We're really starting to get into these more specific, tailored fishing. Asking anglers, fishing. We did a lot of trout fishing courses this winter, which is not something that we've done in the past. So certainly looking for other opportunities, and paddlefish may be a good one here, maybe next spring, to set up some hands-on, in-person training at the actual water body. So you check out that Go Outdoors Oklahoma link to our events page, and if there are opportunities like that, that's where you're going to find them. Anybody have any other questions about maybe where to go? In particular, boat ramp areas, things to be mindful of. Like I said, Miami is that's the paddlefish destination. I mean, that's the paddle fishing capital of the world. The Neosho River from Twin Bridges to Miami Park is going to be pound for pound most years where you're going to get into the most amount of fish. Now, the Arkansas River below Caw and Keystone Lake are going to have the biggest fish. There's not as big of a population, not as much competition. They have ample supply of their desired food source. So we see bigger overall fish coming out of Keystone. That's where the current world record has come out of. We have broken that record 3, 4, 5 times in the last 2 years. Big product of LiveScope electronics these days. especially for a sport like snagging, where you can have live scope for crappie and bass, but you can't make them eat something. With a paddlefish, you can see them on a screen and just pull your hook right up into them. So we know that the population of really, really big 100+ pound fish, because when it comes to paddlefish sizes, your average good size fish is going to run you somewhere between 40 and 65 pounds. That's going to kind of be that box class of mature adult fish. Um, in the Neosho system here, probably for another couple of years, because we had some really, really good spawning classes 2, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, with the flooding that we had those several springs in a row. So we have a ton of fish that are in kind of that 2 foot range. They're anywhere between 5 pounds and 15 pounds. So we have a really good class of fish that is going to come into that 40+ pound range here in the next few years. And you're really going to see a pickup in the Neosho that we saw back in the late 2000s, 2008, 9, 10, was kind of the first real big push that we had from our 1999 class. That was, that really is what spurred Oklahoma paddlefish research. Was this class of fish in the late 1990s was just this epic spawn class. So people really started to catch them in like 2005, 2006, and it's like you're just catching a ton of these things. So since then, the last 2 decades, we've really focused a lot of efforts into studying these fish. They're not all over the country. They used to be all throughout the Mississippi drainage basin, but now there's very limited populations, and especially with any type of size with natural reproduction, which Grand Lake can do. There's some places in Ohio, there's places, or the Ohio River Valley, that have them. The Yellowstone River in Montana that comes off of the Mississippi and the Missouri. Fish can push up into those, but you don't see the type of population. So really, we haven't learned a lot about paddlefish until relatively recently. So now we have a much better understanding. We're focusing efforts on juvenile fish, studying juvenile fish. Not much is known about paddlefish after they've spawned. Where do their fry go? How long does it take them to get back to the lake? Do they even go back to the lake? What's their growth rate from there? Are they predated on? Do blue cats eat them? Do stripers eat them? How long until they're viable, where they really don't have any more natural predators, and then they can grow? Those are the types of things that we're learning now about these fish. But the things that we do know, Grand Lake has arguably the largest population of naturally reproducing paddlefish in the world. Keystone Lake, that up to Caw Dam, produces some of the largest paddlefish in the world. Lots of fish that are over 80 pounds. Grand Lake, you hit an 80-pound fish in Grand, anything over 80 pounds in Grand is a trophy fish out of there. You see a huge class of fish that are in that 40 to 65 pound range. And that's just perfect. I mean, you're never not going to be happy snagging those fish all day long, because they're just light enough that you can play them a little bit better. But when you catch 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them in a day, you feel like that was a pretty good day of fishing. Be careful if you go up to Grand Lake and you've never been there before. Our boat ramps around there, the one at Twin Bridges, it's a dual ramp. One side falls completely off into the river channel. The other one's got some nicks and bruises to it. We sit there when we're loading fish and pulling them back and forth, and we'll sit there and we'll watch people on the boat ramp all day long. And you always just watch the next possible disaster to happen. So be mindful when you're using these boat ramps that you're paying attention when you're dropping them in. Give your boat just enough to get in the water and to get out of the water, is my recommendation, because with fluctuating water levels, flooding over the years, all the other things, especially in a river system where stuff gets washed down, when you're backing a boat into the water, use as little of water as it takes to float your boat. The second that you start getting too deep in, you don't know what's on the backside of that. You can drop tires off the end of a boat ramp. So that's something to pay attention to. Now, Connors Bridge up there has a very nice boat ramp that they put in a few years ago. The problem is it's at a very steep incline, and depending on the water flow, it can be very difficult to get a boat back out of the water because it is so steep. So it's easy to drop a boat into the water when it's nice and steep. Boat comes right off. But when you're trying to get it back on in that current, you're at such an angle that your boat isn't actually on your bunks. It's floating above your bunks because that's the only way that you can get up to attach it to your, your handle to clip it on. So, but it is a nicer ramp. Miami Park, not a lot of danger with that. It's kind of protected by a back jetty. And when current is pushing through, it stays far enough off that you can get a boat in and out, but it is a very narrow boat ramp and there are no boat docks. Twin Bridges has a boat dock. So that is why most people put in there, because you can back your boat in, take it to the dock, have some, you get the truck parked, everything like that. If you go to Connors Bridge or you go to Miami Park, there is no dock. So when you back that boat in, you immediately have to beach it. And there's some sandy areas, but for those, if you have family, if you have anybody who has any type of physical disabilities, those are not the places you want to try to put it in, because it's just muddy and slick. And you can do damage to your boat, which is something you don't want to do. So something to pay attention to there. If you're fishing up around Grand Lake, is Twin Bridges is your best bet. Miami Park, if you're able-bodied, you don't mind getting a little muddy, getting your boat in, that's a good spot, because if fish are pushed up, you don't really have to go very far downriver. You can kind of just go straight across from the boat ramp and be downstream of where everybody is snagging. Well, all those fish push up against the west wall across from the boat ramp, and then once they get around the corner, they split to either bank, because there's a low-water dam in Miami Park, and either side has cutouts on them. So when the water is really flowing heavily, those fish basically just get in a straight line and they go right up where the cracks or where the big kind of dents are in the low water. And when it's pushing hard enough, they can actually go right up over that dam if there's enough water, but you get a little bit of slack current that comes down on either one of those sides where the seawalls are at, and those fish will just hug the bank and go straight up. And that's why when the fishing is really good in Miami Park, it really is shooting fish in a barrel. They have nowhere to go except for in that. So if you get a boat, you really don't need to go very far downstream, because all those fish are coming around the corner and there's some nice staging holes for them out there. So you can go straight across from the boat ramp and tie up to the far bank and just cast straight out into the middle of the river and pick off fish all day long when they're running. But that's kind of the breakdown of Grand Lake. There's some really good spots right at the boathouse below Twin Bridges. So when you get in, you'll go downstream 100 yards and the Spring River meets you right there. And then there's a railroad bridge that goes over. And once you go underneath the railroad bridge, you'll see a boathouse, and there's kind of a back eddy that goes out of that. And there's a seawall or a rock wall, a bluff wall that goes down it. And that can be a pretty prolific staging area. You can get a lot of fish that get stacked up right in that hole. And then once you get past that, you kind of go through this kind of shallow chute until you turn again. And when you turn again right there, there'll be fish that will stack up on that wall. But then once you start getting farther from that, you start to lose the definition of the river channel. It starts to empty out into the north end of the lake around Aguchi Flats. You can find some fish down there, but when you start getting down that far, that's where electronics really come into play, because the water spreads way out. Those fish could be anywhere, and now you're dealing with 300 yards of water on either side of your boat, as opposed to, if you're in the river, you might only have 20 yards on either side of you. So you really kind of condense your fishing area, which when you're snagging, that is of utmost importance, because otherwise you're just filtering water. You're just pulling a hook and wade through water all day long. So you really want to target those areas. And if you are on a river, those are going to be where you get turns up against a wall. That means that water is real deep and it's slower. So those fish come and they rest. They take those turns in a river. That's a good place for big fish to kind of catch their breath, take a breather, and then make their run back up into the current to get to the next place. So, if you get up to Grand Lake and you started at Miami Park downstream, your best fishing spots are going to be, if you're bank angling, Miami Park when CFS is running. So right now I would look for at least 4,000 CFS. 8,000, I think, is like the perfect number up there. If it gets more than that, you start getting above 10,000. The water becomes pretty dangerous, even for experienced boaters if you're out on the water. So 6,000 to 8,000 is a really, really good number, especially if we hadn't had much rain before that. That's going to push the majority of your fish. So you'd start Miami Park, great place to bank fish. if you have those conditions. If you're putting in your boat right there, literally 100 yards downstream on the bank across from the boat ramp, there's going to be this little backwater area. You'll see like this little point come out where the river's kind of turning, and there's a railroad bridge down there that you can see. You can't really see it from the good spot right here, but once you hit the corner, you'll see the railroad bridge. That's a really good run through there. Those fish stack right up along that wall before they get to the park. So that's kind of your first real good spot. Then you can find some fish around that railroad track, especially on the south side of those railroad tracks. There's a couple of holes that are dug out from years of flooding and log jams. It's just kind of forced a couple little kind of slack zones through there. So when fish are pushing upstream, they can get in behind those big log jams and pylons, and it gives them, again, a little bit of a breather. They like to find spots when they've pushed upstream 200 yards through a really fast current. They're going to look for a little soft pocket of water to kind of, get a breather for a minute. So those are kind of the areas to look to target. Now, as you continue downstream, when you get to the I-44 bridge, so where the turnpike goes across the river, that is a really good spot throughout all of snagging season, both for fish going upstream as well going downstream. There's 2 deep holes on either sides of the middle pylons. What most people will do is they'll anchor their boats up against the west bank downstream of the bridge. So, and some of them will park right underneath the bridge, and they'll cast right at those pylons in the run that's coming down and swing through that. And if fish are moving up and down river, you can just tie off there and fish there all day, because you're just going to have fish just coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. Now, on the other bank, there's not really much of a bank, but if the water's moving, there's tons of trees that overhang. And if the water's moving, you can pull your boat up to those trees and tie yourself off to those trees and fish fish back towards the other bank. But you have 2 good runs that come through the middle pylon. So whatever bank you're fishing, you basically kind of have your own run of where fish are going up and down. And then down from that, the dairy farm area and the bluffs, you're going to have staging fish that are moving through that where you can find fish. Those are a little bit less productive, but there are fish that are through there. And then kind of the last quarter mile of river before Twin Bridges, there's not a whole lot. Water's kind of spread out again. Electronics are more important in that spot. And then once you get to Twin Bridges, right there at the railroad tracks, and then at that boathouse and that bluff wall, you can catch fish a little bit farther downstream, but there's not a whole lot of need to go much farther downstream than that. And that pretty much covers you for Grand Lake. I think it's maybe 6 miles of river. It might not even be that far. It might only be like 4 miles of river from basically where the Spring and Neosho come together to where you're hitting Miami Park. It's not very far. It's about, if you're running at least, like 100, 115 horsepower, you're going to be able to get from Twin Bridges to Miami Park in about 20 minutes. So it's not too terribly far. And that's even in heavy moving current to get up there. As far as, the next kind of prime time spot for beginners, and for everybody, just these are the places where you're going to find the most amount of fish. And especially if you're starting off and you're trying to maximize your efforts, you want to go to the places that are going to have the most amount of fish at the right time to where you're going to have the most opportunity. So the Neosho River is, position 1 or it's position 1A, depending on who you are. Because the section of the Neosho below Hudson, so from Shodo Bend, there's 3 boat ramps in Shodo Bend. Some are in better shape than others. But if you put in there and you go up to the low water, that section of river right in there, depending on who you are and how you fish, some people are going to consider that position 1. For paddlefish in the state. Other people are going to consider it, 1A, 1B. But that location and the Neosho River from Miami Park to Twin Bridges, those are the 2 top spots, especially if you have a boat. If you have a boat, those are the places to go and just exhaust, your resources up and down. And they each have 2 very, very good bank access areas. The low water at just above Shodo Bend. is great bank access, and then Miami Park is great bank access. So not only do you have the best boat fishing probably in the state if you're in a river, you also have arguably, top 3, 4, 5 spots to be snagging from the bank. And then from there, it's kind of, what are you looking for? Are you looking for numbers? Or are you looking for a big fish? If you're looking for a big fish, you definitely want to target Caw. That's below the dam at Caw. That's going to be your opportunity to maybe catch a really, really, really big fish in a tailwater. It's not to say you can't catch a really, really big one anywhere else, but that's going to give you the best opportunity at a fish that's over 70 pounds. And then other areas like below Fort Gibson Dam, again, you start running into those things like, how hard is it to snag from the bank? Is it a lot of riprap? Am I in a nice park with a bathroom, or am I walking down 100 feet of very slippery, not solid rocks to then stand there and try to snag fish that are 60 pounds and try not to fall into the river? So that's when you start looking at, places like when you're below, like Disney, there's some spots you can fish from the bank fairly easily. And then there's other spots there that are very challenging to fish from. Like Oologah, you don't have a lot of options. You got those rocks. So you go to Oologah, the fishing might be really good, but it is definitely one of the most hazardous places to snag from the shoreline, because it really isn't shoreline. And then the Canadian below Eufaula, I don't think you're allowed to snag within 1,000 feet of that dam. So you basically, if the water is not running too much, you can walk that sandbar from the parking area quite a ways downriver. But to make sure that you were staying legal with everything, you'd probably want to be in a boat to go down kind of around the corner where you can't see anymore, where you're well beyond 1,000 feet of the dam, and look for holes to look for paddlefish. But there's not a whole lot of places in the state. So most, that's good for anglers, because there's not like some hidden honey hole somewhere that's public that you can get to. There are spots on the Arkansas River. There are spots on the Neosho in between the dams of those lakes where you can find yourself some honey holes, but you need a boat to get there. Otherwise, all of your snagging from the bank is going to be Miami Park, Connors Bridge for the Neosho, above Grand, Shoto Bend, below Hudson, and then below Gibson Dam. And that's going to be it. That's going to be your bank access areas. Then you have the dam below Caw and below Keystone. Those are good intermediate tailwaters. They're not super dangerous, but they're also not like cookie cutter standing on a fishing jetty on flat ground. There is still some, athletic ability you have to put into it. I mean, or you can get hurt. But that brings us through most of the stuff. I mean, we got 28 minutes left if anybody's got any questions. But that's really all I have to cover. We'll probably do some how-tos with the hooks and weights, just some quick videos, so you don't have to watch 2 hours of talking about this. If you want to just learn how to tie, we'll do a good video where it's more of a close-up. It's kind of difficult to do when you're on your webcam like this and then be able to tie. So we'll do it one more time, just in case there's anybody on here who wasn't. We got the time to do it. I'll put it up in front of the screen a little bit better. Hopefully that will, just difficult to see sometimes. So again, we're putting our hook on. We want to go through. Your treble hook's going to have the flat side and the fat side of the eye hole. So you always want your line going through the flat side in. Then you're going to pull through a couple feet of tag end so that we have that tied up here. And then you're going to wrap around each hook point. So we wrap around that one. Then we wrap around this one. And then we wrap around the other one. So now we have wrapped all three sides. And then we are going to wrap around the main shank. So this is an 8/0 hook. So the little reveal where we have to get the line back down and through is not very big. That's going to give you 8 to 10 wraps, and they have to be very tight together, or you're not going to be able to get that line back down through it. So and you can do this really slow. You don't have to be in a rush. So, when you get that first loop or the first wrap going, try to get it as low down. So sometimes you have to pick it up around the point and then come down a little bit. And all you're looking to get is 8 to 10 wraps out of it. You can probably get away with 5 or 6, but big fish, big hooks, lots of equipment. Um, it's always safer to be on the stronger side of the knot, at least on your hook. So we've got wrapped around. So it's going to look like that. What I do when I get to this point, and you don't have to do it, but I like to kind of scrunch those up, get them nice and tight together. So it looks like that. And we take that tag end that we had, and instead of going back through that flat side, we want to go back through our eye hole up here on the fat side. And it doesn't make a lot of a difference. I'm kind of OCD when it comes to knots, so I like them not only to be strong, but I like them to look nice. So I try to make sure that when I go back through that, I'm staying on the inside of the line when I put it through. I'm not wrapping over the back side of it. And it's hard to show it here. You'll notice it when you're actually tying it. But so you get that through and you get it nice and tight. Yeah, see, so like that line worked up on us a little bit, which let's see, where's that tag end at? All right. So yeah, that's what I was talking about, and I do it myself. So when it's looking like that, and up here you can see where that line comes through. So when I'm bringing it up, depending on what side my line is on, where I've wrapped it, so I'll take it over the top of the line on this side. But really, wherever my line has been wrapped around, I want to skirt through this hole through whatever side of the line coming in that my line's already on. So I don't want to wrap over the top of it. So on this one, I'm on the right side. I'm on this side with my tag end. So that's where I'm gonna put my line back through. So I want to be on that side of the main line coming in when I pull it back through the fat side of the eye hole. So, all right. So now we're back and we've got our tag end through. And down our fat side where we made our wraps, we have that little reveal that's right there, like a little divot gap, which is perfect for this type of what we're doing. Now, you'll notice that when you come back up, obviously you can keep this tight down here. But when your line comes up to have to go back through, you're going to have that. It's not going to make much of a difference. I always try to get it on the inside of that if I can. So you can kind of just let up some slack a little bit so that piece, you can get it through it. You don't have to do that, but that just ensures that all of the wrapping you did, that your line is going to be on the inside of that. So we're going to go right. We've got it wrapped. So we're going right down and through it. And sometimes when you wrap around, depending on how tight they're in there, you kind of have to work the line because it's going to, it's not an exact science. Your line's going to be in different places each time you tie this knot on, but that gets us on. And then again, we're not looking for too much of a tag. We only want to have our weight about a foot down. So however, wherever you want it at, you just pinch your line and have that. And like I said, I just do a basic Palomar knot to tie it on. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to double my line over like that. So you create that and you poke that right through your eye hole. So you're like this, and then you just make a simple overhand, just like you're tying a balloon or you're tying your shoes. So it's like that. And then just take that loop and work your weight through, and then pulls the line back up, and then you just cinch it down. Cut your tag end off. So that's pretty much the setup on that. There's not a whole lot to it. And you can cut, again, I'm OCD with my knots and I know that they're nice and tight. So I typically don't leave a whole lot of tag end, but it doesn't make a difference for this. So here's all of our tag end that's off. I'll pinch it fairly close. With this, I'm going to have a little bit of a tag, more so than I ever would on a lure, But that's about all I'm leaving on it. I'm not going to leave a whole bunch, but it doesn't matter. That's just a personal preference for me. So that's all we have. I can't think of anything else that is prudent for paddle fishing. If you're looking for paddlefish information, like relevant right now paddle fishing, our fishing report that we produce sometimes may have paddlefish information in it, but your real best bet is if you're planning on going up to Grand Lake or you're going to Caw Dam or you're going to go to Oolagaw Dam, the first thing that you really want to be looking for during the year, again, we're looking mid-March. Early March, if we get big rains, yeah, there's going to be some fish that are being caught, but that's not your ideal time frame. It's really about right now through the next month and when we get rainfall now. That's the water temps are going to be in that mid 50s range, which is what we're looking for. We don't want to be down in the 40s and we don't want to be up in the 60s. We want to be kind of in the middle of the 50s, which is typically middle to late second half of March in Oklahoma. Southeast warms up a little bit quicker, but we're not really dealing with much paddlefish down there. So not as important. So you're looking basically north of I-40 and east of I-35. That's your paddlefish region, is right in that square. So look at your CFSs, Google, just simple Google search of the name of the river. So in the case of Grand Lake, if I was going to look to go up there to go fishing, I would just type in Neosho River CFS near Commerce. So Commerce is Commerce. Just that's the little town. There's a bridge that's right up from the park. There's a USGS gauge there. That gives me all the readings I want. It's going to tell me what my CFS flow is. Now, there is a gauge in Miami Park, but it reads in gauge height, not in CFS. So you have to know what the gauge height is at different times of different flows to be able to read that one accurately. It's easier to read the ones that are just giving you the instantaneous data of what is the current CFS. And you can see the trend line on the graph to see if the water's rising, crested, or coming back down. You can get fancier than that. And NOAA, if you go to NOAA's website, you can get there. They actually have prediction center. So not only are you getting instantaneous value, but they'll actually read out what they think will be the crest of the river and at what time. So our guys who work up at the Paddlefish Research Center, that they use that a lot because it gives them kind of a window. So when you call the center, hey, heard you guys picked up some rain. Is the fishing any good? They'll look at the NOAA data to say, well, the river looks like it's going to crest in 17 hours. So that basically means that the next 17 hours are going to be lights out, fish pushing up river. But once the river crests, it's going to start to get a little bit more sporadic. Are fish falling back down? Is there still enough water that it really is going to crest? Isn't that big of a deal? Like we're really looking for a couple of days after crest to bring the water levels to a point where those fish have really broken up. They're not all tight right together anymore. That's what you're looking for when you start out for fishing. With the tailwaters, that's even easier because you can just type in. You can actually just go to our website and go to our where to fish pages. And if you go to like Caw, you can click on Caw lake level down at the bottom of that page. And it's going to show you the dam reading. So it's going to tell you how many gates they have open and how many cubic feet they're discharging. It's not going to tell you average trends. That's the nice thing about CFSs on rivers is it gives you a medium. There's always triangles on there that show what historically, if you were to take every data from that day and time over the course of that gauge's history, that triangle is reading, this is where we average. So obviously there's some years that are way above it, years that are way below it, but that's kind of a good happy medium to know where should the water be. And then if it's elevated, it's time to fish. So that's the resource to go to first. But if you're going up to Grand Lake, especially, call our Paddlefish Research Center. They're going to be able to tell you, yeah, people are whacking fish. They're in the park. They're in the river. We're seeing good numbers. Now's the time to fish. But if you're looking to go to somewhere like a Caw or an Oolagaw or Keystone, I would go to the where to fish page for those lakes, and I would call the game warden. They're going to be the ones who are out there, foot traffic, watching anglers, seeing catch rates, they're going to be able to give you the most up to date information. Whereas if you were to call like the regional fisheries office, they may not have even been out there that week on that particular body of water. So they don't know. The game wardens are always going to be able for white bass runs, paddlefish, things where the window closes really quickly. When we have spawning species of lake fish or pond fish, we know what we're looking for. We know what that window is. It's April. So if we get if it's warm and sunny and windy, like fishing's going to be good. But with migrating fish that are affected by water temperature and flow, that's stuff that if you have to commit to making a drive, you're not a resident, you don't live 15 minutes away from the water, you don't want to drive 3 hours to go filter water if you don't have to. So that's kind of the steps that you should be taking if you're looking to paddlefish or you're looking to white bass fish and catch a run by bank angling in a public access spot, looking at the CFS. Then if you're in the case of paddlefish on Grand, call the Paddlefish Research Center. If you're going anywhere else, call whatever that county game warden is. And then check our fishing reports for information like that. But you can get a lot of the knowledge that you need to know if fish are actively going to be moving based on factors that have nothing to do with the wildlife department. You can figure that stuff out just through looking at CFS gauges, knowing that, hey, if water's at 6,000, this is the first time the river's been rising all spring. It's like, yep, now it's time to go. And how long those deals last is just dependent. So, generation schedules. So if we have a spring where we don't have a ton of rainfall, like at a Caw or a Keystone, and they're generating the same amount of water for power every single day, it's not based on we have to drain water, then just look at what the generation schedule is, because it's going to be the same every day if it's not flooding. Now, sometimes on the weekends, they'll shut them down for angling purposes in different areas, depending on what species are in there. But typically, if there's no flooding, you're going to have the same generation schedule every day. So you can just look at what time do they open the gates and then what time do they close the gates. Well, the time from when they open them to when they close them, that's what you're looking for. What time frame is that? That's when if I'm going to go up there tomorrow, I need to be there during this time frame, because that's going to give me the best opportunity to catch fish while the water's running. Because all it does, there's fish below those dams, but when you turn the gates on, it forces them in to where the current breaks are. So it puts them in very easily recognizable areas, and then stacks them in on top of each other because they're all looking for the same thing. And that's when they're easier to catch. You can go below a tailwater when they're not running water, like maybe they just have the sluice pipe open. There's just some water coming down, just their normal release. There's going to be fish in the deepest holes, but you have to hit those holes. And there may only be a handful of fish. So it's like you hit 1, 2, maybe 3, and then that's going to be it. So you really want to try to maximize your efforts by looking for the variables that are going to add the most amount of fish in the most concentrated area at, in a reasonable time frame, is when it lasts. So that's all I got. I haven't seen any other questions pop up. So if you got any questions, I know this one was a lot of talking, not a lot to show, because there really isn't that much. We're rod, reel, hook, weight, and line. That's it. There's nothing more to that. You're gonna learn your own cadences and rhythms and best way to tie on your hook and tie on your weight. You're gonna learn all those things yourself through trial and error. These are the foundational blocks to get you headed out in the right direction. They are by no means an exact science. It's what works for us. It's what works for novice anglers that we take fishing, so we know that it is multi-purpose. You can use it. You don't have to be an expert angler to do what we just showed and be successful. So this is going to get you started off on that right path. But if you ever have questions, call me, email me, text me. If you have paddlefish specific questions, like about the fish itself, I wouldn't do it right now, but after our Paddlefish Research Center is closed, you can call up there and get in touch with our paddlefish biologists, and they'd be happy to answer the questions for you. Don't call them between now and the end of April, because they work 14 hours a day moving fish and cleaning fish. So all they can do is just say, yeah, the fish are here, come now, it's time to fish. But if you have questions about the fishery itself or anything like that about the fish, call them anytime between, May and February, somewhere in there, and they'll be able to either correspond with you through email or talk to you on the phone about that. But they're good dudes. They know a lot. They're kind of the leading edge of paddlefish research in the country. So they know just about as much about these fish as anybody out there. So they're really good people to talk to. But yeah, let me know. We're there. Just if you're thinking paddlefish, the next rain that we get that's going to hit the Arkansas or the Neosho watershed, it's time to go. Whatever that next day after it has stopped raining, however much rain we got, you're going to get 24 to 72 hours of the best fishing of this year. And that's when it will happen. So the next big rain we get, that's going to be the time to go, especially for the Neosho River, where they go up and they come back. You're going to have longer sustained success at like a Shoto Bend area where you have generation and flooding and other things that are constantly moving the water level up and down that keeps those fish kind of in there. Same thing below Fort Gibson. Caw can get really low if they shut the water off, and a lot of fish end up dying sometimes. Stripers, paddlefish, lots of different species, because they end up getting beached if they turn the water off. So that one you do need some generation. So you want to go to our Where to Fish page, go to Caw Lake and click on the Caw Lake level, and it'll take you to the dam, and it's going to show you how much water they're running. But that Caw stays pretty good for about 2.5 months. Fort Gibson stays pretty good for a good 2.5 months. But if you're looking to just get that right bank action, shooting fish in a barrel, craziness paddlefish experience, it's going to be Miami Park the next time that we get that rain to push it up to 8,000 CFS. So if that's what you're looking to get into this spring, it's March 25th today. So I would be looking at the extended forecast, look at the weather. It doesn't have to rain in Miami. It needs to be raining up the Neosho watershed. So you can type in like looking for weather in like Augusta, Kansas, where anywhere up there where the Neosho comes out of a dam up there, south central Kansas, that's where we need water. We want all of our rainfall. We want 3-4 inches of rain in south central, southeastern Kansas. That's what's really going to create a sustained pulse of water for a multi-day, if not multi-week event of fish going. But if Miami Park or the Neosho River is your destination of choice, that's what you're looking for here in the next 2 weeks. South central Kansas picking up 1, 2, 3 inches of rain, and pulsing the river up from way upstream. So the water has to keep coming. If it just rains from the Oklahoma border south, it's not going to do a lot. You're going to get some quick movement of fish, but it's not going to be a long sustained migration because that water is going to crest really quickly. And then it'll be over with. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Thank you everybody for coming. We can't do these things without you. We're glad that there are people out there who are looking to get more fishing information. That's what we're here for. We want to help you be successful. It's no fun to go fishing and not catch fish. So anything that we can do to help you on your fishing adventures and journeys to, put you on more fish more often, that's better for everybody. So best of luck out there this spring. Stay safe. We got a couple Asking Anglers coming up in May. We have in April, largemouth bass at the beginning of April, and then we'll have a pond fishing course at the end of April, and then May we have some catfish, sunfish, non-game species, and river bass fishing, which is probably my favorite course of the year. So if you got any interest in doing river or creek bass, sign up for that one. That's a good one. If you're going to get the best and greatest tips out of any of those, that one goes a long ways for helping you out. But we like all these to try to give you as most direct Oklahoma specific information as possible. So if you have a question, I know it can be tough sometimes when you get online and look at a map and you're like, it looks like I can fish here, but I don't know if it's public. Those are barriers to fishing, and we want to break those barriers down. So until we can have things on our website that clearly list all of that out. If you can't find that, just call or text me or email me, and we'll try to get you in the right direction. So, uh, everybody, have a great spring. We're gonna have a great fish in April. We had a fantastic winter that was fairly mild. We've gotten a couple of good dousings of rain coming into the spring, so really looking forward to this April. I think all of our species statewide, we're going to have a really just quality condensed fishing when it's really good, and we've kind of missed out on that the last few years with sporadic March and April weather, and it seems like we're on a pretty good trajectory this spring. So best of luck out there, everybody. And like I said, feel free to reach out to me anytime you got any questions. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.